London, November 26, 1983. The cold morning sun rose over Heathrow Airport, its pale light spilling across a quiet warehouse complex tucked behind the runways. To most, it was an ordinary Saturday. Travelers checked in for flights. Families prepared for the holidays, and guards at the Brinks-Mat facility prepared for another routine shift. But for 6 men, this day would etch itself into British history. Inside that warehouse sat gold, 6,000 bars of it, stacked neatly in blackened cases, glittering in the shadows, worth over £26 million. In today's money, nearly $100 million. It was more than wealth. It was temptation. By nightfall, the robbery would become known as the crime of the century. A gold heist so brazen, so vast, that it would unleash decades of laundering, betrayals, and bloodshed. For London, it wasn't just a robbery. Underworld empire. This is the story of the Brinks-Mat robbery. To understand the robbery, we must first understand the warehouse. Brinks-Mat was a high-security company specializing in transporting and storing valuable cargo, cash, jewels, and gold. Its Heathrow depot was considered impregnable. Heavy steel doors, cameras, and armed guards protected its contents. On November 26, however, fortune turned against them. Inside the vault were not just routine deposits, but an enormous delivery of gold bullion. 6,000 bars, weighing over 3 tons. They had arrived only hours before, intended for international banking transfers. The timing was perfect, for anyone who knew about it. But knowledge of the gold's presence wasn't random. It came from inside. Anthony Black, a security guard at Brinks-Mat, was quietly leaking details. He was the brother-in-law of one of London's seasoned criminals, Brian Robinson, who had connections to a larger criminal network led by Mickey McAvoy. Black's job gave him proximity. He knew the shifts, the blind spots, and, crucially, the layout of the vault. He wasn't a master criminal, but he held the keys, literally and figuratively, to the kingdom. When McAvoy and Robinson heard about the gold, they knew this was more than a smash and grab. This was a once-in-a-lifetime chance. What began as whispers over drinks became a carefully shaped plan. A plan that would rely on precision, violence, and betrayal. The team assembled was not made of amateurs. 6 men, hardened by London's underworld. Among them, Mickey McAvoy, the leader, ambitious and ruthless. Brian Robinson, a career criminal with contacts in armed robberies. Anthony Black, the inside man, willing to sell his loyalty for a cut. Several hired muscle, men who knew how to wield guns, intimidate guards, and vanish when needed. Their disguises were simple but effective: dark clothing, balaclavas, and gloves. Air weapons were real: handguns, crowbars, and threats sharpened by desperation. At 6:30 a.m., as frost still clung to the ground, a van rolled quietly toward the warehouse gates. Anthony Black was already inside, standing at his post as though nothing was wrong. But when the van arrived, he didn't sound an alarm. He opened the gates. The robbers moved with military precision. They didn't storm the warehouse screaming. They walked in like men who belonged. They subdued guards, tied their hands, and demanded access to the vault. The entire operation had been built on one man's betrayal, and Anthony Black delivered. But there was a problem. Brinks-Mat guards were trained to resist. One shouted, hesitated, and nearly triggered an alarm. The robbers reacted fast, guns to heads, threats of immolation with petrol poured over their prisoners. Violence hung heavy in the air. The guards gave up. Inside, the robbers expected to find £3 million in cash. Instead, they discovered gold. Mountains of it. For a moment, silence filled the room. Then came the realization: this wasn't just a robbery. This was history. Imagine 6 men staring at more gold than they could ever have dreamed of. The sheer weight of it was staggering. Over 3 tons. UT greed overcame logistics. They couldn't walk away with a fraction, they wanted it all. The robbers forced guards to help load the bullion. Forklifts hummed under the flicker of warehouse lights as crates were stacked and pushed toward the waiting van. Sweat mixed with adrenaline. Every second that passed was borrowed time. Outside, Heathrow continued its Saturday routine. Planes taxied, passengers checked in, customs officers stamped passports. Nobody knew that a crime was unfolding in plain sight. For nearly 2 hours, the robbers worked with ruthless efficiency. They stripped the vault clean, taking not only gold but also cash and diamonds. By the end, the van sagged under the impossible weight of stolen fortune. Before leaving, they warned the guards. "Say a word, and you'll burn." Petrol fumes lingered in the air, a chilling reminder of their threat. Then the robbers vanished into the cold London morning. At 8:30 a.m., the world had changed. Brinks-Mat had been gutted. £26 million, gone without a trace. The heist was only half the battle. Detraceable. Moving it required more than muscle. It demanded infrastructure. McAvoy and Robinson had no intention of melting it themselves. They turned to contacts in London's underworld. The bullion was transported to safe houses. From there, pieces were slowly moved to foundries, where corrupt refiners agreed to melt the bars and recast them. Gold was laundered through jewelry, investments, and international transfers. McAvoy believed they had done it. He bought lavish estates, cars, and lived like a king. But wealth has a way of drawing attention. Neighbors noticed sudden riches. Police noticed, too. The gang had underestimated one thing. Betrayal doesn't end at the robbery. It festers. Anthony Black, the inside man, began to unravel under questioning. He admitted to his role, and soon police had names. Scotland Yard launched one of the largest investigations in its history. Within weeks, the net was tightening. But the gold itself, the very evidence of the crime, was slipping further from reach. The Metropolitan Police faced a nightmare. How do you recover gold that is melted and reshaped daily? Traditional tracing was impossible. Instead, detectives focused on people. They interrogated Anthony Black, whose testimony led them to McAvoy and Robinson. Surveillance was placed on suspects. Phone taps, stakeouts, and informants painted a picture of a criminal empire blooming overnight. In December 1983, McAvoy and Robinson were arrested. At trial, Black's betrayal became central evidence. The two leaders were sentenced to 25 years each. But prison bars didn't end the story. Authorities estimated that only a fraction was ever recovered. The rest was laundered through international markets, slipping into banks, businesses, and even legitimate investments. The robbery had become more than a crime. It was a contagion, spreading through financial systems, poisoning everything it touched. The true legacy of Brinks-Mat was violence. The gold became blood money. Criminal networks fought over their share. Laundering required killers as much as accountants. In the years that followed, dozens of people connected to the robbery died in mysterious circumstances. Murders, disappearances, executions in back alleys. The trail of corpses stretched across decades. One laundering specialist, John Palmer, was nicknamed Goldfinger for his role in processing Brinks-Mat bullion. He became fabulously wealthy, but also a target. In 2015, Palmer was shot dead in his home. Police investigations into organized crime, property empires, and drug trafficking all traced their roots back to Brinks-Mat gold. It had seeded fortunes and fueled wars between gangs. London's underworld had been reshaped. For ordinary people, the robbery was a distant headline. For criminals, it was a revolution. The Brinks-Mat robbery wasn't just a crime of greed. It was a blueprint. It showed that the biggest hauls didn't come from banks or armored cars, they came from the blind spots of trusted institutions. The gold spread far and wide. Investigators later estimated that much of Britain's property boom in the 1980s and 1990s was financed by Brinks-Mat laundering. Apartments, businesses, even respectable companies carried tainted wealth. The phrase Brinks-Mat became shorthand for corruption, betrayal, and the thin line between legitimacy and crime. And through it all, one fact remained. More than half the gold was never recovered. Even today, wedding rings, luxury watches, and bank vaults across Europe may contain fragments of that stolen fortune. 40 years later, the Brinks-Mat robbery still casts its shadow. It wasn't just the money. It was what the money did. It corrupted, it killed, and it rewrote the rules of British crime. Anthony Black, the guard who opened the door, couldn't have imagined the empire he unleashed. Mickey McAvoy and Brian Robinson paid with decades behind bars. But the gold lived on, shape-shifting through markets, impossible to pin down. In the end, the robbery that shook London was never truly solved. The criminals may have been caught, but the treasure slipped into the bloodstream of global finance. And somewhere, even now, Brinks-Mat gold glitters in the dark. A reminder that greed leaves scars deeper than steel doors, and shadows longer than time itself.